students, welcome to Vision Pharmacy. In our today's video, we are going to study difference between flocculated and deflocculated suspensions. So before we start with our today's video, please do like, share and subscribe as well as press bell icon for getting updates on upcoming videos. Let's begin, students. So here you can see flocculated suspension. So what is meant by this flocculated suspension? Flocculation is the formation of flocks by clumping of fine particles. This could be explained better with the help of this image. You can see the fine particles are scattered all over. However, these fine particles come together, they form clump and then they settle down, forming a network-like structure. Whereas a deflocculated suspension is the dispersion of flocks to form a colloid or a stable colloid, right? So this could be understood much better with the help of this image. You can see the scattered particles have settled down as separate entities, or they have distributed themselves uniformly throughout the suspension, right? Now moving to the actual differences between this flocculated suspension and deflocculated suspension. So the first point to differentiate is definition. A flocculated suspension is a suspension in which particles are flocculated, whereas a deflocculated suspension is a suspension that has not been flocculated. Talking about flakes. So a flocculated suspension has flakes and a deflocculated suspension does not has any flakes. Now the particles of dispersed phase aggregate and form a loose network-like structure as we have already seen in the image in flocculated suspension, whereas the particles of the dispersed phase remain as a separate entities in deflocculated suspension. Sedimentation rate is high in flocculated suspension and sedimentation rate is less or slow in that of deflocculated suspension. Then sediment formation. So sediment is rapidly formed in flocculated suspension, whereas it is slowly formed in deflocculated suspension. Talking about the sixth point of differentiation, that is packing of sediment. So sediment formed is loosely packed in that of flocculated suspension and sediment formed is tightly packed in deflocculated suspensions. Sediment volume in flocculated suspension is high, whereas the flocculated volume in deflocculated suspension is less. Okay, then moving to some more points of differentiation. So the next is porosity of the sediment. Flocculated suspension forms porous sediments, whereas deflocculated suspension forms non-porous sediments. Then the next is cake formation. So in flocculated suspension, hard dense cake is not formed, whereas hard dense cake is formed in deflocculated type of suspension. The next point to differentiate is redispersion. A sediment formed in flocculated suspension can easily be redispersed by shaking. So once you shake, all the particles settle, they will get redispersed throughout. Whereas redispersion, a sediment formed in a deflocculated suspension, is difficult by stirring. Then the next is supernatant liquid, that is the liquid which is at the upper side where the particles settle down. So supernatant liquid is clear in flocculated, whereas supernatant liquid is not clear in deflocculated types of suspension. Then the next is appearance. So suspension is not pleasant in appearance in flocculated, whereas in deflocculated suspension is pleasant in appearance. Then the last point of differentiation, that is sticking. The flocks or in the flocculated suspension, These floccules stick to the side of bottles, whereas the floccules do not stick to the side of bottles in case of deflocculated suspension. So that's all students in our current video. I hope you have understood the difference between flocculated and deflocculated types of suspension. Thank you students for watching this video till end.